My husband's gold watch was the only thing he left me, but my son and his wife sold it for their business. Then the buyer called me. "Ma'am, you have to see what's hidden inside this watch. The silence in our little house in Columbus is the loudest thing I own." It's been a year since my husband Frank passed away, but the quiet he left behind still echoes off the walls. Some days, it feels like I'm just a ghost haunting the edges of my own life, a life that was once so full of his booming laugh and the scent of the Old Spice he'd used for 40 years. My days are small now, built from tiny routines that keep his memory from fading completely. I still make a full pot of coffee every morning. Even though I only drink 1 cup, I still leave the porch light on until I go to bed, just like he always insisted. And every single afternoon, right when the sun starts slanting through the big window in the living room, I perform my most sacred ritual. On the center of the mantelpiece, on a small velvet cloth, sits Frank's watch. It's a vintage 1960s Bulova, a simple, elegant gold timepiece that he wore every day of our life together. I'd take the polishing cloth from the drawer and I'd lift the watch, its weight familiar and comforting in my palm. The gold was worn smooth in places, and the leather band was creased with the memory of his wrist. As I gently rubbed the crystal face, I could almost see him. I'd see him in the backyard, a much younger man with a full head of dark hair, squinting at the grill on a hot July afternoon, the sun glinting off that gold watch as he flipped burgers. I'd see him holding our son, Michael, for the first time, his hand and the watch looking so huge and protective next to that tiny baby. It wasn't fancy, not by today's standards. He bought it with his first real bonus from the factory, a symbol of a promise he made to me, that we would build a good, hard-working, honest life together. And we did. When he was in the hospital, in those last, hushed days, his hand felt so frail in mine, he struggled to unlatch the watch and pressed it into my palm. His voice was a thin whisper, but his eyes were clear. "This will always take care of you, Carol," he'd said. I thought I understood. I thought he meant his memory, his love, all wrapped up in this one little object, would be my comfort. I never imagined he meant it literally. To me, it was the last piece of him I had left. It was everything. So when Michael and his wife, Jessica, came to visit a few weeks ago, the tension was something you could taste in the air. They blew in like a frantic gust of wind, all nervous energy and bright, fake smiles. They live a life I don't really understand, running a trendy, high-risk restaurant in the short North Arts district. "It's not just a restaurant, Mom," Michael would say. "It's an experience." They chattered excitedly about their plans, about the new artisan menu and locally sourced everything, but their eyes were shadowed with worry. Finally, over the pot roast I'd made especially for them, the truth came out. The restaurant was on the verge of financial collapse. They needed a cash injection, $30,000 to be exact, to avoid bankruptcy. My heart ached for them, for my son, but then Jessica's eyes drifted to the mantelpiece. "That's such a beautiful watch, Carol," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that felt all wrong. "I was just reading an article online. Vintage pieces like that can be worth quite a bit these days, especially a classic Bulova." A cold dread washed over me. It felt like she'd just admired the family pet while secretly thinking about how much its pelt was worth. "It's not for sale, Jessica," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "It was Frank's." The rest of the dinner was a nightmare. The air grew thick and heavy. Michael, my own boy, started in on me. His voice was soft, laced with a carefully crafted disappointment that was worse than any shout. "Mom, think about it," he began. "Dad was a pragmatic man. He would have wanted to help his family, to secure our future. This is about securing a future for your grandkids." The mention of grandkids, a future I might not even be here to see, was a low blow. It was emotional manipulation at its finest, and it cut me deep. "Your father gave me this watch," I said, my voice trembling. "It's all I have left of him." "You have memories, Mom," he retorted, a little too quickly. "This is just a thing. A thing. My 40 years of marriage, my husband's legacy, the last promise he ever made me, reduced to a thing." I refused, flatly, horrified. They left soon after, a cloud of resentment trailing behind them. The next few days were an onslaught. My phone buzzed constantly with text from Michael. "We're going to lose everything, Mom. Jessica is a wreck. Just think about what Dad would have wanted." Each message was another twist of the knife. I stopped answering. The guilt he was trying to pile on me felt heavy and suffocating. But my grief was heavier. My loyalty to Frank was immovable. Or so I thought. 3 days after that awful dinner, I went to perform my afternoon ritual. I walked into the living room, the soft cloth in my hand. And I stopped. The space on the mantelpiece, the small velvet square in the center, was empty. My breath caught in my throat. No, it couldn't be. I searched frantically, my hands shaking. I looked under the sofa cushions, behind the photo frames, in the junk drawer, all the stupid places you look for something you know, deep down, isn't just lost. My stomach churned with a sick, rising panic. And then my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A single text message. It was from Michael. My blood ran cold as I read the words on the screen. "Mom, I'm so sorry. We had no choice. We'll make it up to you, I swear." I sank into a kitchen chair, the phone slipping from my fingers and clattering onto the linoleum floor. The silence in the house rushed back in, but this time it wasn't just empty. It was filled with betrayal. He hadn't just taken a watch. He had stolen the last tangible piece of my husband. He had taken my comfort, my ritual, my connection to the past. He had carved another hole in my already broken heart, and I was left staring into it, utterly and completely alone. The first few days after I found the watch gone were a blur of hollow shock. The silence in the house, once a comfort, had turned into an accusation. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to be counting the seconds since my world had cracked open. That single text message from Michael burned behind my eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. We had no choice. We'll make it up to you, I swear." I must have read it 100 times, my thumb hovering over the screen, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. No choice? Weeks bled into a painful month. The vibrant reds and oranges of the Ohio autumn outside my window seemed to mock the gray, colorless world I now inhabited. I tried calling Michael. At first he'd pick up, his voice rushed and full of a brittle, false energy. "Mom, hey, can't talk, we're swamped. The turnaround is insane. I'll call you back this week, promise." He never did. Soon my calls started going straight to his voicemail, the cheerful, recorded greeting a slap in the face. Jessica? She might as well have fallen off the face of the earth. I called her once, heard the click of the phone being picked up, followed by immediate silence and then the dial tone. She had hung up on me. After that, I stopped trying. The silence from them wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a decision. A wall they had built, with me on one side, and their shiny new life, paid for with a piece of my soul, on the other. My grief for Frank, which had settled into a soft, manageable ache over the past year, tore open anew. But it was different now, tangled up with this fresh, sharp betrayal. Missing the watch and missing my son became the same wound. Sometimes, I'd sit in Frank's old leather armchair, my hand resting on the empty spot on the mantelpiece, and I couldn't tell who I was crying for anymore. Was it for my husband, or for the boy I had raised? The boy who had looked me in the eye and lied while his wife sized up my most precious memory like it was just another item at a flea market. In the dead of night, when sleep wouldn't come, I'd commit a special kind of self-torture. I'd open my old tablet, my hands trembling slightly, and navigate to the restaurant's Instagram page. It was like picking at a scab. I knew it would hurt, but I couldn't stop myself. The page was a spectacle of success. There were glossy, professional photos of their grand relaunch. A shot of a gleaming new stainless steel commercial oven, big enough to fit a whole pig. A close-up of a fancy, high-end Italian espresso machine, all polished chrome and bright lights. Michael had posted that one with a caption, "Leveling up our coffee game, making our dreams a reality, one perfect cup at a time." But the one that really twisted the knife was a photo of him and Jessica. They were standing in the middle of their bustling restaurant, beaming, their arms wrapped around each other. They were holding up glasses filled with some sparkling, bubbly beverage, their faces flushed with victory. Jessica's smile was wide and triumphant, her eyes glinting in the low light. And the caption, written by Michael, read, We couldn't have done it without our investors who believed in the dream when things got tough. This turnaround is for you. Feeling so blessed. Investors. The word echoed in the crushing silence of my living room. I was an investor. I had made an involuntary, soul-crushing investment. I wasn't a mother who had been robbed. I was a line item on their path to success. They looked so happy, so untroubled. There wasn't a hint of guilt in their eyes, no trace of the devastation they had left in their wake. Looking at them, so carefree and proud, made me feel like an old fool. A stepping stone they had used to cross a rough patch, now left behind on the muddy bank without a second thought. I wrestled with what to do. My sister, Sarah, would tell me to call a lawyer, to sue them for everything they had. Part of me, a cold, angry part, wanted to. I imagined walking into that restaurant and making a scene, telling every one of their customers what kind of people they really were. But then I'd see Michael's face in my mind. Not the smug man on Instagram, but the little boy with scraped knees who used to run to me for a hug. How could I publicly shame my only son? How could I air our family's dirty laundry for the whole world to see? The thought of the whispers, the family fracturing, it paralyzed me. So I did nothing. I was trapped in my quiet house, in a cycle of silent resentment and a sorrow so deep it felt like I was drowning. Then one Tuesday afternoon, as I was half-heartedly dusting the furniture, the landline phone rang. The sound was so jarring in the quiet house that I flinched. I rarely got calls on that line anymore, except for the occasional political survey or sales pitch. The caller ID just said, "Unknown number." My first instinct was to ignore it, but something, a flicker of, I don't know what, curiosity maybe, made me pick it up on the third ring. "Hello?" I said, my voice raspy from disuse. There was a brief pause on the other end. Then a man's voice, gentle and elderly, spoke. "Am I speaking with Carol Peterson?" "This is she," I said cautiously. "Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Mr. Howard. I run a small antique and horology shop down in German Village, Howard's Horology." He had a kind, calm way of speaking that put me slightly at ease. My heart gave a painful lurch. German Village wasn't that far from the short north. "Okay," I managed to say, my throat suddenly tight. "Well, ma'am, I know this is a bit unusual," he continued, his voice still measured and professional. "But I recently acquired a gentleman's timepiece, a 1962 Bulova, gold-plated. It's a beautiful piece. The young man who sold it to me, he was in a hurry, but he happened to mention his mother's name was Carol. The air left my lungs in a rush. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, my knuckles turning white. It was real. It was gone. Sold. For cash. The confirmation sent a wave of nausea through me. Yes, I whispered. "That was my husband's watch." "I thought it might be," Mr. Howard said softly. He paused, and I could hear the faint, rhythmic ticking of clocks in the background of his shop. "Ma'am, I wouldn't normally call a previous owner. It's not my policy. It's just, I was performing a deep cleaning on the mechanism, getting it ready for display, and, well, you have to see what's hidden inside this watch." My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen in my own kitchen. The cordless phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt. What did you say?" I asked, my voice a wavering whisper that was barely audible even to me. The man on the other end, the one who called himself Mr. Howard, cleared his throat. His voice was calm and kind, the sort of voice you'd associate with a grandfather reading a story, not one delivering a bombshell over the phone. I said, "My name is Mr. Howard. I have a small antique shop in German Village. I believe I have your husband's watch. A young man sold it to me. He mentioned his mother's name was Carol." German Village. It was just a few miles from my little suburban house in Columbus, a historic neighborhood of brick-paved streets and charming old storefronts. For a moment, my mind couldn't process the information. It was like he was speaking a foreign language. Then, the words clicked into place, and a hot, shameful flush crept up my neck. My son. He hadn't just sold it, he'd sold it here, in our own city, for what I could only assume was a pittance. I don't understand," I stammered, sinking into a kitchen chair. The silence from Michael and Jessica had been a constant, howling void for weeks. This sudden, unexpected voice from the outside world felt jarring, unreal. "Ma'am, I wouldn't normally call," Mr. Howard said, his tone shifting from polite inquiry to something more urgent, more insistent. "It's not my business what happens to an item before it comes to my shop, but I was cleaning the mechanism and, well, you have to see what's hidden inside this watch." Hidden inside? What could possibly be hidden inside? A gear? A spring? The words made no sense, but the conviction in his voice was undeniable. It wasn't the voice of a salesman or a con artist. It was the voice of a professional who had stumbled upon something so unusual he felt compelled to break his own rules. A faint, almost forgotten spark of curiosity flickered to life within the suffocating fog of my grief. "When?" I asked, my voice still trembling but a little stronger now. "Whenever you're ready, ma'am. I'll be here until 5. My hands shook as I drove the familiar route towards downtown. The world outside my car window seemed muted and distant. All I could think about were Frank's last words, his hand weakly pressing the cool, heavy watch into my palm. "This will always take care of you, Carol." I had replayed that moment 1,000 times, always believing it was his poetic way of saying his love would endure. I never, not for a single second, considered he might have meant it literally. Mr. Howard's shop, Time and Treasures, was tucked between a bookstore and a German bakery. A small, pleasant bell chimed as I pushed open the heavy wooden door. The air inside smelled of old paper, lemon oil, and something metallic and clean, like a machine shop. Clocks of every shape and size ticked and chimed softly from the walls, a gentle chorus counting away the seconds. The space was cluttered but meticulously organized, filled with glass display cases of pocket watches, vintage jewelry, and intricate music boxes. A man who had to be Mr. Howard emerged from a back room, wiping his hands on a soft cloth. He was in his 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a neat white mustache. He was exactly the grandfatherly figure his voice had promised. "Mrs. Peterson?" he asked with a gentle smile. I simply nodded, unable to find my voice. "Please, come back. It's on the workbench." He led me past the counters to a brightly lit workspace covered in tiny tools, magnifying loupes, and the delicate guts of a dozen different timepieces. And there it was. Laying on a square of soft black velvet was Frank's watch. The familiar gold case gleamed under the focused beam of the work lamp. Seeing it again was like a physical blow. The grief I had been bottling up for weeks surged, and my eyes instantly filled with tears. It was so much more than a watch. It was our Saturday nights out, the feel of his wrist in mine, the symbol of a lifetime of hard work and quiet devotion, all sold by our son to fund a trendy restaurant. "I know this is difficult, ma'am," Mr. Howard said softly, giving me a moment. He pointed to the watch with a pair of fine-tipped tweezers. "I've been a horologist for over 40 years. When I buy a piece like this, a 1962 Bulova, a classic, the first thing I do is a full service. I clean the movement, check the seals, but as I was examining the case back," he gestured to the back of the watch, "I noticed something, an anomaly. It was almost imperceptibly thicker than the factory standard. We're talking a fraction of a millimeter, but for a piece of this precision, it's like finding a brick wall where there should be a door." He picked up a small, specialized tool that looked like a tiny, flat-bladed screwdriver. My curiosity got the better of me. I studied it under magnification and found a seam so fine it was practically invisible. With the delicate precision of a surgeon, he inserted the tip of the tool into a hairline crack I never would have seen. He gave a gentle twist. There was a soft, satisfying click. He carefully pried away not the entire backplate, but a disc of metal that had been seamlessly fitted into it. It was a false back. My heart hammered against my ribs. I leaned closer, my breath held tight in my chest. Beneath the piece of gold was a shallow, custom-built cavity, no bigger than a quarter, perfectly carved into the watch's casing and lined with what looked like dark blue velvet. And nestled inside were two objects. One was a minuscule piece of paper folded into a tight, tiny square, yellowed and fragile with age. The other was a small, ornate brass key, its head shaped like a clover. "Go ahead," Mr. Howard prompted gently. With hands that felt clumsy and disconnected from my body, I reached out and lifted the folded paper. It was terrifyingly light, as if it could turn to dust at my touch. I painstakingly unfolded the brittle creases, my heart pounding a deafening rhythm in my ears. And then I saw it, the familiar, slightly slanted handwriting, as clear and certain as the day he'd written it. It was Frank's hand. Tears blurred the words, but I blinked them away, forcing myself to read. "My dearest Carol, if you found this, my final surprise is revealed. I always told you this watch would take care of you. This key opens safe deposit box number 713 at Huntington Bank downtown. Everything inside is for you and you alone, to live the life we always dreamed of. All my love, forever, Frank." The breath I'd been holding escaped in a ragged sob. It wasn't a wave that crashed over me. It was the entire ocean, the sudden crushing weight of it all, the depth of Frank's love, his incredible foresight, his secret plan to protect me. It wasn't poetry, it was a promise, a tangible, solid, real promise, hidden away in the one thing he knew I would cherish above all else. And my son, my only son, had sold it. He had sold this key, this map to a future Frank had meticulously built for me, for a new espresso machine or a case of artisanal cheese. The full gravity of his betrayal finally landed, cold and sharp and utterly devastating. He hadn't just sold an heirloom. He had sold my security, my last gift from my husband, my future itself. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My breath was caught somewhere in my chest, a tight, painful knot of shock and a grief so profound it felt new again. Mr. Howard, the kind shop owner, simply placed a gentle hand on my arm. His touch was grounding, a small anchor in the tidal wave of emotion that was crashing over me. "Ma'am," he said, his voice soft, "are you all right?" I finally managed a sob, a ragged sound that tore from my throat. I clutched the tiny yellowed note from Frank, his familiar cursive a ghost before my watery eyes. I looked from the note to the watch, then to the strange little brass key in my palm. A plan! It had all been a plan. Frank's final, secret act of love. I reached into my purse, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unzip it. I need to buy this back from you. How much?" "I don't have much cash on me, but I can go to the bank." Mr. Howard held up a hand, stopping me. He had a kind, crinkled smile, the sort you only see on men who have lived long, decent lives. "Nonsense, Carol," he said, using my first name as if we were old friends. "I paid the young man who brought this in, but I won't be taking a dime from you. This is a part of your husband's legacy. It belongs to you." He carefully slid the watch across the counter, its gold case gleaming under the shop light. Then he placed the note and the key beside it. "Frank wanted you to have this, all of it." I couldn't even form a proper thank you. I just nodded, tears streaming down my face, and gathered the items that suddenly represented my entire life, past, present, and a future I couldn't yet comprehend. Leaving his quiet, dusty shop in German Village felt like stepping out of one world and into another. The numbness that had been my constant companion for a year was gone, replaced by a strange, sharp clarity. It was as if a thick fog had lifted, and I was seeing everything for the first time. I wasn't just a grieving widow. I was a beneficiary. I was the keeper of Frank's final promise. I didn't drive home. The little key felt heavy in my hand, a solid piece of reality. Huntington Bank, downtown. Frank's note was a map. Without a second thought, I turned my old Buick toward the heart of the city. My heart wasn't pounding with anxiety anymore. It was beating with a steady, determined rhythm. A cold, righteous anger had begun to settle deep in my bones. The bank was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the storm inside me. I explained my situation to a manager, a poised woman in a sharp blazer who looked at me with professional sympathy. She checked her records, her fingers tapping quietly on her keyboard. "Yes, Mrs. Peterson. Box number 713. It's registered in your husband's name, with you listed as the sole beneficiary upon his passing." She led me into the vault, a place I'd only ever seen in movies. The air was still and smelled of metal and paper. She retrieved a long metal box and placed it in a private viewing room, leaving me with a quiet, "Take all the time you need." My hand trembled as I inserted the little brass key. It turned with a satisfying, solid click. Lifting the lid, I don't know what I expected. More letters, maybe some old photos from our wedding, but it was so much more. On top lay a stack of stock certificates, blue-chip companies, names I recognized from the news. Beneath them were property deeds. My eyes widened as I read the address. It was a small duplex over in Clintonville, a rental property I never ever knew we owned. And under it all was a simple blue passbook for a savings account. Tucked inside the passbook was another longer letter in Frank's handwriting. My eyes went to the passbook first. I flipped to the last page, to the most recent entry. The final balance was printed in crisp black ink, $814,267.31. I sank into the chair, the air leaving my lungs in a whoosh. My mind couldn't process the number. It was just symbols on a page. I picked up the letter. "My dearest Carol," it began. "If you're reading this, it means my little trick with the watch worked. I love you more than words can say, and I want you to have the life we always dreamed of, a life without worry. For 40 years I took a small piece of every paycheck and I invested it. I kept it a secret not to deceive you, my love, but to protect you. I saw how easily good people can be taken advantage of, even by their own families. I worried that if others knew about this nest egg, you would face pressure. You would be asked to sacrifice your security for their dreams. I couldn't bear that thought. This is for you, Carol, for you and you alone. To travel, to be comfortable, to be free. Live it for both of us. All my love forever, Frank." The cold anger I'd felt earlier now ignited into a pure, hot flame. He knew. My Frank, my quiet, unassuming husband, knew. He had seen the ambition in Michael's eyes, the calculating nature of his wife, and he had built a fortress to protect me from it, a fortress they had sold for pocket change. Empowered and filled with a clarity so sharp it hurt, I didn't go home. I put everything back in the box except for the watch, the key, and the passbook. Then I drove straight to the short north. It was 7 p.m., the height of the dinner rush. Their restaurant, the Gilded Fork, was buzzing. Through the big glass windows I could see people laughing, servers rushing with plates of expensive food. My son and his wife had built this on a foundation of betrayal. I walked in. The noise was a low roar. Jessica was at the host stand, smiling sweetly at a couple waiting for a table. Her smile faltered when she saw me. "Mom, what are you doing here? I need to speak to you and Michael," I said. My voice was calm, almost unnaturally so. It scared her more than if I had been screaming. She led me to the side, and a moment later, Michael came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "Mom, is everything okay?" he asked, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes at being pulled away from his busy service. I didn't answer. I looked at both of them, at their successful, beautiful life they were so proud of. Then, slowly and deliberately, I placed Frank's gold watch on the polished wood of the host podium. Next, I set down the small brass key, and finally, I laid the blue bank passbook beside them, opened to the page showing the final balance. I let them stare at it for a long, silent moment. I watched their faces. Jessica's jaw went slack. Michael's eyes widened, his face draining of all color. They looked from the passbook to the watch, then back to the passbook. The shock was there, yes, the horror, too. But beneath it all, I saw something else rise to the surface, something ugly and undeniable. The sickening, desperate glint of greed. "You sold this," I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through the restaurant's din like a shard of glass. "You sold it for what, $5,000? It was the key to this." Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. Air came out, but no words, just little gasps. His eyes, wide and panicked, flickered from my face to the passbook, then back again. The 6 zeros after the 8 seemed to burn into his retinas. "Mom, we didn't know," he finally stammered, his hand reaching out as if to touch the book, then pulling back. "We can fix this. I'll pay you back, every cent, I swear." But his promise was hollow, undone by the truth in his eyes. They weren't looking at me with remorse. They were locked on the staggering balance, a greedy, desperate hunger turning his shock into something ugly. Jessica stood beside him, a statue carved from ice. Not a single word escaped her lips. Her perfectly made-up face was a mask of cold calculation. I could practically see the numbers spinning behind her eyes, the gears of her mind grinding away, figuring angles, calculating losses, recasting her future around this new, colossal sum of money she'd almost gotten her hands on. The smell of seared scallops and garlic from the kitchen suddenly seemed cloying and cheap. The sophisticated clinking of glasses and silverware from the dining room felt like a soundtrack to their greed, a palpable thing in the air between us. And in that moment, the burning rage that had propelled me here from the bank just evaporated. It left behind something much colder, much heavier, a profound, chilling clarity. I wasn't looking at my son and his wife anymore. I was looking at two strangers, partners in a transaction where I was the collateral damage they'd been willing to accept. The boy I'd raised, the one who'd clung to my leg on his first day of school, was gone. In his place was a man who saw his mother not as a person, but as an untapped resource he'd failed to fully exploit. The warmth I'd once felt for him was replaced by a deep, hollow ache of finality. "Frank left me that money so I would be safe and independent," I said, and my voice surprised me. It was level, steady, and utterly devoid of the tears I'd been shedding for weeks. He left it to me, and me alone. I paused, looking from Michael's desperate face to Jessica's frozen one. I think somewhere deep down he knew a day like this might come. Slowly, deliberately, I reached out my hand. My fingers closed around the smooth, worn leather of the passbook. I picked it up. Then I picked up the tiny brass key. Finally, my hand closed around Frank's gold watch. Each object felt heavy, not with its physical weight, but with the weight of its meaning. I wasn't just taking back my property. I was taking back my life, my future, my dignity. I tucked them securely into my purse. "You made your choice," I continued, my voice as quiet as a sermon in that busy restaurant foyer. "You chose your business over your mother. You sold our family's honor for a new wine cooler." I watched the last bit of color drain from Jessica's face at that specific jab. I turned to walk away, the chatter of the restaurant diners feeling a world away. My heels clicked on the polished concrete floor, a sound of departure, of an ending. At the door, I stopped. I didn't know why, but I felt one last thing needed to be said. I looked back over my shoulder at my son, who now just looked like a pathetic, defeated man. "Don't call me," I said, the words as clear and sharp as glass. "When you've paid back the full value of what Frank left for me, not the pittance you sold it for, but the entire $800,000, then maybe you can call me. Until then, I have a life to live." Months later, the air wasn't cold and filled with the smell of exhaust and anxiety. It was warm, thick with salt, and carried the gentle, rhythmic shush of the ocean. I stood on the balcony of my new condo in Naples, Florida, a mug of coffee warming my hands. The morning sun glinted off the turquoise water, painting a glittering path straight to the horizon. On my wrist, catching that same morning light, was Frank's gold watch. It didn't feel like a heavy anchor to the past anymore. It wasn't a symbol of a year of grief or a month of betrayal. As I stared out at the endless blue expanse, the watch felt light, like a promise kept. It was a testament to a husband's enduring, quiet love, a man who had planned to take care of me even after he was gone. And it was a testament to my own strength, a strength I never knew I had until I was forced to find it. A gentle breeze rustled the palm trees below. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean sea air, and I smiled. It wasn't a sad smile, or an angry one, or a forced one. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, it was a genuine, peaceful smile of a woman who was finally, truly free.